Drop it.
Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. My name is Flexi, and if you've been a part of the competitive Yu-Gi-Oh environment these past couple months, you may have noticed that the time rules are under attack once again by the community, and for a good reason, because nobody likes losing in time, nobody likes getting slow played or cheated or life point burned during the final phase after the timeout or whatever. And many people suggest in the comments, like even more so than before, that chess timers might actually fix the problems that the time rules have brought to Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, many content creators disagree, and personally I also wasn't sure about that, so I kind of took it upon myself to give it a bit of a more objective look and give it some more thought, to maybe come up with some suggestions of my own to even improve upon just beyond using chess timers in Yu-Gi-Oh! Instead of the global timer, right? Now, before we get into the pros and cons, I'd just like to quickly explain how we went about it. So I took a friend of mine, sat him down, we played 3 matches, and we used chess timers for that. We gave every player 20 minutes. We didn't use the +1 second where you gain a second every time you click the timer. We didn't do that because it could, like, if the non-turn player, especially against a combo deck, knows that he doesn't have an interruption, he can just immediately click his timer again every time the time comes over to him. And that way he could basically farm multiple seconds, if not even half a minute, or in the worst case, I could imagine against a combo deck that you could even farm like in a whole minute just by clicking no the entire time, right? Which is kind of unfair. And the other thing we did is that we paused the timer for side decking, which in the first place we didn't do in this, but at the same time we weren't sure, like we didn't think about it enough to come up with a way to fairly do this, because you can't make the timer run down on both timers simultaneously. Now, if you could do that, then that could be a solution, but in this case we couldn't, and we didn't know how to handle it otherwise, so we just stopped the time for that, and since we didn't side deck, it didn't even matter anyway. But yeah, with that out of the way, let me get into the pros first. And this is basically just one very big pro, but kind of has a couple smaller ones branching off of it, and that is that the opponent's time doesn't impact yours at all, which is obviously the reason why everybody wants it, right? Like, if your opponent takes a long time to play his combo, it doesn't matter to you. If he tries to slow play you, it doesn't matter to you. The life point burn damage won't impact you in that case, though that's another topic that we're gonna get to by the end of the video. It's also basically impossible to cheat you by just checking the grades like 10 times or whatever, so none of that really impacts you, which is the #1 reason why players want chess timers in Yu-Gi-Oh! But those kind of come with their own set of problems, and one of them being, for example, that combo decks are inherently at a disadvantage because their turns just take longer than control decks usually, right? Now you could say, well, that doesn't matter, or I don't like combo decks, and if a deck takes too long to play, then they deserve to lose or whatever. But it's kind of weird to implement rules or mechanics that inherently put an entire game mechanic at a disadvantage. Then again, Master Rule 4, for example, did that. Master Rule 4 put basically every non-linked extra deck, deck playstyle, whatever you want to call it, at a disadvantage, especially pendulums, with the pendulum zone changes and stuff. So there's precedent for implementing rules and mechanics that put an entire game mechanic at a disadvantage. That way, and also, if we were being realistic, the only combo decks that would really suffer under time rule, like chess timer rules, would be Flower Guardians and weird like 60 card, 15-minute normal summon Scrap Raptor into fucking, I don't know, Bishop Vulcan, FTK combos, whatever. Like those weird table 500 combos that you see, those are basically the only ones that are suffering from chess timers, right? So yeah, that's why I don't think that combo decks being at a disadvantage inherently is too big of an issue with the chess timers. Just to debunk one of the cons that I often read under many comments. And then another issue I've personally thought of, and some other people also, is that you have to click basically for every time the prior changes or the phase is supposed to change, and that can be very tedious because even before you reach the first main phase, you have to click like 6 times, and then for every normal summon, for every activation, for every chain, for battles. Don't get me started on the battle step, right? There's just way too many interactions, so this could become tedious and maybe even distracting. Maybe it could even like throw you off your game basically if you have to think to click every time, and it's also could be a cause for time losses or for quote-unquote cheating your opponent out of some time if he just forgets to click, and also forgetting to click or just causing situations where the time hasn't been swapped correctly is also very difficult. First of all, how do you correct such a game state? You can't just go back and add like a couple seconds, and it's also impossible to prove to a judge. Like, let's say your opponent didn't switch the time and he by that gained like, let's say 20 seconds, and you only notice later, right? Even if the app was able to like log every single time the time was switched over to the opponent, you still couldn't prove that your opponent did it correctly or incorrectly, right? This is kind of the new form of cheating that's been introduced to the time rules after we managed to kind of eradicate the other form of cheating out of the time rules by changing them. And then it's also like some stuff that's, I want to say, out of order, where it's not part of a chain, but like reading cards, checking grave, like stuff like that isn't exactly part of a chain, for example, but it's still part of the game, right? Those things also have to be like strictly ruled or given an opinion on by Konami on how to time that properly, which is also a cause for concern for me personally, because it can also cause like rule sharking incidents. It can lose time for either player, and then it's kind of like somewhat reverting to the old problems that time rules have had. And also one other con that I've come up with, kind of, though I'm not sure if that's even a con to begin with, I'm just gonna mention it here, is that remote duels would basically be impossible to play with chess timers unless there's an online tool that can give a synchronized chess timer. Like, well, I guess you could maybe even use a chess simulator for that. I don't know. I didn't think about it enough, but like in remote duels, you obviously can't use the same device for chess timing, so you would have to find a way to do that. And maybe you can even use the +1 second method, where you gain a second every time you click. Especially for people who don't have two screens, you would have to like swap the window between Discord and the chess timer or whatever, and then click every time, go back to Discord, stuff like that. So yeah, remote duels are much more difficult, I think, to implement with the chess timers, but that may also just be something that I'm not aware of that can actually be solved very easily. And now, after showing you some of the pros and cons that I've been able to come up with, or that I've found in YouTube comments and stuff like that, I would like to talk about some of the questions that came up when me and my friend tested this, or just by thinking about it. And one of them is, maybe it might be more difficult, or this is not exactly a question, I guess, but it might be a little difficult to centralize the entire procedure, because right now Konami clicks play and then there's a 45-minute timer and everybody knows this is the time that's like valid for me. Whereas with 1,200 like individual chess timers, like let's say YCS Dortmund, 2,400 players, right? 1,200 individual chess timers. How do you control that on Konami's side? You could say that Konami can still just start a timer like 45 minutes, for example, and then by the end they're going to check whether everybody has returned their match slips or whatever. But that's kind of one thing that I kind of came up with that may be a little more difficult to handle. Another thing I've been thinking about is the side decking, which I've mentioned before. Like, how would you like control the side decking time, because you can't have the timers of both players run down simultaneously? And I've come up with a couple ideas. So for example, the timer could be paused, which, as I said, I don't think is optimal, but it's definitely an option. Another option would be to have separate 3-minute, like one separate 3-minute timer, and both players are like, you pause the timer, start a second timer with 3 minutes, and then both players have 3 minutes at the same time to side deck, which is kind of what Konami is envisioning. And then the third option, which I think I may like actually personally, is that you add time for the side decking to the players' timers. So you come up with a total time for the matches plus siding, and then you side separately. So for example, you finish the match, and then let's say the game winner gets a side first. He gets his timer is running down. He side decks within 3 minutes, clicks the timer, and then so the opponent's turn with side decking, he also has 3 minutes, and then it's decided to start playing, and they click the timer and keep playing, right? Those are basically the three methods I came up with to consistently or officially rule the siding. Another thing that came to mind is the end of time procedures, because right now, when the game ends, of course, this is the playtime of both players simultaneously. So the turn player gets to finish his phase and try to win the game in that, and then who has less life points wins the game, and then who has won more games won the match, right? Under chess timers, it's a little more difficult, because, like, let's say my opponent runs out of time, he's at 0 seconds. That's like, and I have 3 minutes left, right? So how do you handle that? Does the opponent get a game loss? Does the opponent? Well, that's the thing is, game losses at first I thought were the optimal solution, because that's kind of basically what happens at the current moment with the time rules. But I had a feeling that maybe under those rules, draws could be even more frequent than with the old time rules, which is something that Konami is also trying to avoid, right? So maybe this has to be tested more. But I do think that game losses could be hit or miss. Another thing could be that if the opponent runs out of time, like my opponent runs out of time and I have 3 minutes left, that I get to play my turn, like he passes turn to me forcefully at 0 seconds, and then I get to play my turn for the rest of the time, and I have to win during those like 3 minutes or whatever I have left, right? Be it by OTKing or having more life points than the opponent left at the end of the turn or whatever, right? These are basically the two approaches that I've been able to come up with, or that sounded good to me, under the potential new time rules, right? And then another, well, I don't want to call it a con basically, and I've kind of gotten into this before, I think, but one thing that also has to be officially ruled by Konami is when exactly do you click the timer? Like, do you click the timer when you place the card on the field, and then you explain what the card does, but on the opponent's time, or do you explain what the card does first with targeting, and then you click the timer to give it to the opponent so he has time to think? And in this case specifically, I think like declaring the targets and maybe explaining shortly with keywords like search, for example, or pop or whatever, explaining what the card does should be done on your own time, and then you click the timer. But this is kind of in a similar vein with the things that are out of the game, basically, with like checking grave or whatever. On whose time do you edit life points? Is it the guy who takes the damage? Is it the guy who attacked? Also, the battle phase and damage step, there's so many steps in there. How do you manage that? Like, is it maybe something that you agree beforehand, where you say, oh, I know I don't have any effects, so you can just keep playing or whatever? This is also one thing. Like in the games 2 and 3 that my friend and I played, we kind of went for a more like lax approach. Basically, we didn't do it as automated simulators do. We just said, if I know that, or if I would like to activate something, I'm going to click the timer myself and give the time over to myself, so my time runs down when I take time to think or activate something. But even this has kind of caused us a few problems where we didn't really know whose time it's supposed to be now, because it's not as strictly ruled. And so before the chess timers could be implemented into the game, there really has to be like a solid foundation with every detail written down in the rules, basically, when the timer has to be clicked. Which is why automated simulators are perfect, because they just do it at every single interaction. But for humans, it's much more difficult, and especially if you're like in a stressful situation. Let's say you're in the like semifinals of a YCS or whatever, and you still have to, while playing optimally, thinking about everything your opponent does, like remembering his added cards and stuff like that, and then at the same time you have to consider every single step of having to click the timer. This could actually be very stressful for the for every player, basically, and this is also something that has to be taken into consideration. And so with all of this out of the way, final suggestions and ideas that I've been able to come up with basically is that there's another two approaches to the like total time that is available. Yeah, you can either go with a full match timer, so every player gets, for example, 20 minutes, 22 minutes, 25 minutes, something like that. And then you play 2 to 3 games under this kind of, I want to say, global timer. Or you can also have, say, 3 individual timers with 7 minutes each, saying that one match should only take 15 minutes approximately. And then either player, like each player gets 7.5 minutes. And then when the game ends and you start side decking, that would also solve the problem of side decking, right? Because you finish the game, you reset the timers, and then while this timer is reset and doesn't run down, you side deck, you shuffle your deck, and when you start playing, you once again have 7.5 minutes each per player, right? For game 2 and then for game 3 as well. This could also be another way of approaching this. And another, like basically my final suggestion for this would be that maybe instead of having to click at every single interaction, at every single phase change, prior change, and whatever, maybe it could also be officially implemented as a rule, not just like in a lax way where you say, oh yeah, I'm just gonna click the timer when I have something, right? But actually, instead of clicking your timer immediately after normal summoning a monster or activating an effect, you activate the effect, wait for half a second, and if your opponent doesn't click the timer immediately, like if you, or let's say differently, if your opponent sees that you activate a card or normal summon a monster or something, and he would like to think about whether or not you want to respond, then he is kind of obligated by the rules, then that would be my suggestion, to immediately click the timer. And even if he doesn't respond at the end, he takes the time to think on his own time, right? Because if you kind of decide in the beginning that you don't want to switch time after every single interaction, after every single action and either player takes, then that could cause time losses for the turn player every time, right? And to avoid that, you could basically force the opponent to quickly click the timer if he wants to think about it or even respond immediately. And if he doesn't like click the timer within, say, 1 second or half a second, then the turn player knows, okay, I can just keep going. This is a little less strict and could also cause like ruling issues and stuff, and like sharking and stuff like that, but it could be an approach to basically fix some of the problems that the new time rules would bring. Alright, and that basically wraps up everything I have to say for now about the potential new time rules with chess timers in Yu-Gi-Oh! It was really fun for me to play like this. Actually, my friend also enjoyed it, and I personally think that, or at least I'm going to try to get him to play under the chess timer rules more often in the future. And I'm also going to try and optimize the system a little bit, maybe come up with my own rules, try and make it a little more strict from the beginning, just to see how well this could be implemented. And this was a lot of fun, actually. If you have any suggestions how to improve some of the problems I've talked about in this video, or if you just have any other, like, if maybe you've been able to come up with other problems that would have to be addressed, or maybe you already have an optimal like chess timer Yu-Gi-Oh system in mind and you just didn't have anyone to talk about to, just drop it in the comments. I'm gonna take a look at everything, and I can also like do a follow-up video where I review your comments and talk about a combined optimal system, maybe like taking the things I said into consideration as well as your comments and trying to improve this as a whole. And if you enjoyed the video, then definitely leave a like, share this with other people so more people can like have a more objective look at the situation with time rules and Yu-Gi-Oh! Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content. Usually I'm more focused on like duel videos or deck profiles or combo tutorials, but sometimes I also kind of take detours into different areas of the game where I do discussion videos like this. So, and with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I see you next time.